Italy is without a doubt a beautiful country. It is the birthplace and capital of Catholicism, and its landscapes and vast countrysides are some of the most breathtaking in the entire world. It is also home to some of the most beautiful people, architecture, and food in the world as well. As a result, it comes as no surprise that Italy is one of the most traveled to and visited countries in the world. There are not only a lot of spectacular sights to be seen in Italy, but there's also a huge and interesting history behind nearly every city in the country. There's, of course, the ancient history of Rome and the enormous amount of Renaissance history in Florence, to give just two examples. But there are also a lot of key historical locations to be seen throughout the rest of Italy, such as the Basilica della Santa Casa, or the Holy House, in Loreto, Italy, in which, according to the legend, the Virgin Mary lived and was visited by an angel, resulting in the Immaculate Conception of Jesus Christ. But visiting many of these smaller towns throughout Italy can be a serious problem to much of the world due to the language barrier, which is much more present in these smaller towns than it is in cities such as Rome, Venice, and Florence. I spent approximately 5 weeks in Italy throughout the month of May and early June of 2014. For the majority of this time, I was in a small hill town in the Marche region of a country called Macerata. Macerata, as of 2012, has a population of just over 42,000, few of whom speak English. However, the issue of the language barrier is only the first of the cultural differences, which tourists or foreigners should take into consideration and make an effort to notice during their time in the country. 3 of the most striking cultural differences are in how much of a focus there is on energy and resource conservation, religion, and the food. The first of these cultural differences is the amount of effort the Italians put into energy and resource conservation. One may not even take notice or think about this until it is pointed out to them, but once you notice it, it really does stand out. Italians conserve energy and resources by being more careful with electricity and making more reasonable vehicular decisions. For example, to conserve electricity, Italians are much more careful with their usage of lights. When an Italian leaves the room, they almost always turn off all the lights on their way out. And to accommodate this habit for Americans or others who are not used to this, all of the hotels in Italy require a room key to be inserted into a slot in the wall in order for any of the lights in the room to work. Italians also conserve electricity by air drying clothes and sheets. Walking through Italy, it is not at all an uncommon sight to see clothes or sheets hanging on a clothesline outside to dry, rather than using electricity burning clothes dryers. Yet another way the country of Italy conserves electricity is by limiting the use of air conditioning and heating. Air conditioning and heating will only work during certain months of the year. For example, heating will only work during the fall and winter, and the air conditioning will only work in the spring and summer. If you are cold or hot in the nighttime or during the day, and it is not the time of year for you to cool down or heat up your house, you are left improvising in order to get comfortable. Italians are not only more cautious with their usage of electricity, but they also make much more reasonable decisions when it comes to vehicle usage. Everyone who chooses to purchase a car in Macerata chooses a car that is built to get good mileage. Almost every car that you see is a sedan, coupe, or a compact car, and the few vans that you do see are vehicles used by companies, which need the space in the back of the vehicle. In addition, you would be hard-pressed to find an automatic transmission vehicle in Italy, because almost everyone drives manual transmission cars, or stick shifts. Many more people also choose to drive motorbikes or mopeds around as well. All of this is in an attempt to get the best mileage possible. This is necessary for Italians because here in Italy, gas and diesel is sold by the liter rather than by the gallon. 3.79 liters go into a single gallon. Therefore, gas is actually much more expensive in Italy than it is in America. Another difference in gas is that in Italy, diesel is actually cheaper than regular unleaded gasoline. As a result, all of those small manual transmission, coupes, and compact cars are also fueled by diesel. Just another way of getting the best possible mileage out of the vehicles. Another huge difference between America and Italy is in how Italians treat their religion. Not the least of these differences is that, being the birthplace and capital of Catholicism, nearly every single church throughout the country of Italy has a long and meaningful history behind it. All the churches you see here in Italy have a vast history and clearly show the beautiful architecture of the time period during which they were built in.
The actual participation in Mass is heavily oriented towards elderly women. Even in the exceptions would be the major holidays. And then I was in a large church, for example, a couple Sundays ago. It was very striking. I saw there may have been 300 people there. I saw 2 teenage boys. In that it's just not. It's really frequent. What's not unusual is to see a car drive up, the women and girls get out, and the man, the husband or the sons, drive off and do something else. Because of this notion of separation of church and state in the United States, we don't necessarily acknowledge the way it is. And when it comes into politics, we get very upset, right? Because, and we've associated religion with right-wing politics in the United States. That's not so much an issue here, right? If pretty much everybody's Catholic, and even if you're not a Catholic, practicing Catholic, you understand that is the culture, that those are the laws, this is the way society operates. So you don't have to operate necessarily within that structure, but you're not going to raise a big fuss about it because there's an assumption that that's what Italian culture is. And again, they're sort of tied together. It's much more acknowledged here as part of a long-standing tradition of actually the amalgamation of church and state. I mean, they've had their differences, certainly, but the church has a lot of power here, and that's political power as well, not just cultural and religious power, it's political power, economic power. The church is still one of the major landholders in Italy. I mean, we debate in the U.S. about whether we can display a cross on public land. The entire landscape here is formulated around religious symbolism. The churches, everything, the names, everything's imbued with religion. The idea of separating those is almost absurd.
The last, and arguably the most obvious culture difference here in Italy, is also the most enjoyable to learn about yourself. Italians treat food as a much more serious force than we are used to in America. For example, in America we have many different holidays centered on different things, only 1 or 2 of which are centered on food: Thanksgiving, and for some families, Easter. In Italy, every single holiday is centered around food. Everyone who visits Italy will definitely leave the country knowing one thing without a doubt: Italians love their food. Meals in Italy are events that days tend to revolve around. For one thing, meals in Italy are a much longer ordeal than in America. This is because of the fact that most real Italian meals come in 3 or more courses, one at a time, and nobody starts on the second course of their meal until everyone is done eating the first. Because of this, meals are often an hour and a half or longer for Italians, especially lunch. As a result of the importance of lunch, most stores in Italy close almost every single day from about noon to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when they will reopen for the rest of the day. Dinner is oftentimes consumed much, much later in the day than we are used to in America. Most people in Italy do not even go to sit down at a restaurant until about 9 o'clock at night, at the earliest. Therefore, restaurants often open and close again at about 3, and they do not reopen until about 8 o'clock at night, at which point they stay open until about 1 or 2 in the morning. In addition to the difference in meals, alcohol consumption in Italy is a much different animal than it is in America. Drinking in public is much, much different in Italy than it is in America. In Italy, it is frowned upon and considered immature and, in some places, even rude to be noticeably intoxicated in public. As a result, going out is a very different experience, centered on meeting people and having, for the lack of a better term, clean fun rather than going to the bars with the intention of getting drunk. Drinking at dinner is different as well. Wine is commonly consumed by all parties present at the meal, but it is intended to be taken at a very slow pace. It is meant to be consumed one little sip at a time, not downed quickly. Should you ever get the chance to visit Italy, and you dare take on the language barrier and travel to the smaller, lesser-known towns, these are all the things that I would recommend you to keep in mind during your time in the country. The conservation of energy and natural resources is taken much more seriously in Italy. Religion is a much more significant piece of society as a whole, and the food culture is much more highly regarded than it is in America. There are, without a doubt, literally hundreds of culture differences between Italy and America, but these are three of the most obvious differences that I noticed during my time in the small but charming hill town of Macerata, Italy.